Hi, so
Let's talk.
I was planning to get this talking about 2 hours. So let me see how it goes. I'm Tad Hirsch. I'm at the University of Washington. I teach in interaction design in a school of art. And I also run something called the Public Practice Studio, which is the kind of cross-disciplinary practice and research lab where we use design as a way of addressing issues of public concern, widely construed. And so what I'm going to talk about today is some very, very preliminary data from a long-term, multi-year project. Ultimately, that's about trying to connect or to create local food systems that connect regional farmers with childcare centers. So where we're at this point is it's currently really a strategic design project in which we're trying to sort of identify what are the specific opportunities that we think we see. We've done some field work, and I'm going to try not to use the word ethnography here, but it would smell like ethnography kind of research. And we'll then move into more of an implementation phase. But what I'm going to present today is just really that initial research and some initial ideas. Now we have there's sort of 2 impetuses for this project. On the one hand, the project team includes myself, some nutritionists, groups of local farmers, and some policy people who work for the city of Seattle. So one of the concerns has to do with local food systems. Seattle has been one of the kind of hotbeds of the local food movement for quite a while. There's a very, very established network of farmers markets, farm-to-table restaurants. All of the grocery stores have local food sections or are entirely locally food-oriented. So we've been doing this stuff for a little while now, and it's getting to the point where I think we're starting to kind of bump up against some of the limitations of local food as we've been conceiving them. And specifically, what I'm referring to is the focus on retail consumers as the consumers of local food, right? There's at least two sets of problems here. One has to do with the farmer's market as your main vehicle. For a farmer to sell food at the farmer's market requires a lot of work. Minimally a day, typically 2 days of labor to prepare and then set up and sell produce. Typically for very little return. The demand just simply isn't there on a large scale. And so the markets work very well for a very select number of farms, but in an agriculturally rich region such as ours, there are many farms who have just opted out. It's not working for them. Okay? One of the things that has come up to try to address that problem on the supply side are new forms, things like food hubs. This is a growing kind of idea, as I understand there's a local, something that's kind of like this. And these are new organizations that are meant to be kind of aggregators. So a food hub will take on the work of distribution and sales. So for example, our regional food hub here offers websites and mobile apps so that consumers and restaurateurs can, it's not a CSA, they can actually order the produce they want. The farmers deliver produce to a distribution center that's located near them, near the farm. And then the food hub is responsible for making sure that food is delivered where it needs to go. So it allows farmers to focus on farming, which is what they want to do, and it does it in a way that's relatively inexpensive and low overhead so that the produce can still be delivered at a reasonable price. Okay, so they're working on the supply side of the problem, but the other piece of it is really the demand side. And I think there's reason to doubt, sorry, but I think it's quite possible there simply is not enough demand in the retail market to support a really rich local food system in many places, including ours. So one of the things that we're interested in doing is trying to bring institutional buyers into the mix, right? Instead of just focusing on homes and restaurants, can we start getting schools and hospitals, for example, to also make commitments to local food, right? Because if we think we can do that, suddenly you have a scale where you can actually support large numbers of farmers and who would prefer to opt out of the global food system. Okay, so that's one set of concerns. The other set of concerns has to do with the quality of food that's offered in preschool. So childcare, by which we mean simply formal arrangements for taking care of children, typically before the age of 6, before they go off to kindergarten and school. This is a growing industry and growing movement in the US and elsewhere. According to this, 61% of preschoolers are in childcare. That number actually goes up to 80% when you just look at families that have working moms in them, which is another way of saying that as you move down the economic scale, you get more and more kids in preschool. Okay, working class, middle class families are overwhelmingly sending their kids to preschool, which is where they are doing the bulk of their eating. The food that they consume, eating habits that are developed between the ages of 2 and 5 are perhaps the most crucial. Kids under the age of 5 are more likely to try new foods than kids above that age. And the habits they develop that age will then continue throughout their lives. So there are linkages between the kinds of foods that you eat before you're 5 and your likelihood of being obese, diabetic, and a whole set of other health effects. So we really want to improve the quality of food that we're offering to kids in this age range. Okay? Now, it seems easy enough. Got child care centers here, they need food, farmers here, and we can just hook them up somehow. Sounds great. Turns out, though, that there's a very basic question that people don't really know the answer to, which is simply how do child care providers actually buy food, right? Turns out we don't know. There's been almost no study of this. There have been a few studies of how schools procure food. Turns out child care centers are actually not like schools in all kinds of ways. There have been a very small number of studies of how homes, domestic users, choose and buy food. And again, child care centers are very different from homes. So in order to do our design work, we needed to just have some insight about how current practices work. We did some background reading and found out no one has any clue. There's an assumption that it's all driven by price, that when you're running a child care center, money is the primary concern and you're just buying the cheapest stuff you can. We were skeptical of that conventional wisdom, so we decided to do some looking and see if we could come up with a more nuanced picture. So what we've done is a qualitative study. We will have done 20. We've done 16 centers so far. We've got a mix of urban and I'd say suburban to peri-urban centers, so some in urban centers, some that are more on the outskirts. We've got a mix of in-home daycare centers, local sort of small-scale child care centers, and large corporate centers. The majority of the centers we look at are considered mixed income. So they've got some proportion of their kids that are on federal assistance. We've got a few that don't have that. Okay, we're trying to get a spread because we want to understand kind of how practices are working across a range of places. Got to think about what I'm going to skip here. Skip that. Let me skip that for the moment. So the first thing to say is, when you're looking at food use, food consumption in childcare, food in childcare is not just about meals. You find food rampant throughout the curriculum, right? Virtually every childcare center we visited has some kind of small garden going where they're growing vegetables and herbs, to use the local pronunciation, right? Kids are involved in the gardening. Kids are taking those foods into the classroom, are preparing them and eating them. Yeah? And that's not about a meal. That's about science learning. That's about fine motor skill development. There's a bunch of stuff going on. So food in childcare is not just about meals. It's about curriculum. This is great. This is even better. So tons of examples of kids being asked to do drawings and paintings of food. This, if I recall, was broccoli by a couple of 2-year-olds. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, it's fantastic. Tons of this stuff. Right? So that's what's going on. So they're eating it, but they're also using the food throughout. And so when we want to ask how childcare centers are provisioning food, you have to think about the broader picture of what work food is doing in the center. So food is not just about meals, and meals are not just about nutrition. This is just a posting in one of the staff areas. identifying what the responsibilities are of adults when it comes to mealtime in the classroom, right? And what you see here is, you know, a couple of interesting things, right? There's a bunch of stuff here that's about getting the kids to try new foods, right? When you're serving foods to this age group, you're trying to get them to eat healthy food, of course, but you're also, there's a notion that you're teaching them how to eat, and you're teaching, by extension, their families how to eat. So there's a lot of emphasis on shaping the palate, introducing new foods, techniques for introducing and reintroducing new foods, right? There's stuff here, one of the things that they talk about is the value of doing family-style dining. So they like to have the kids all sit and eat the same thing together because there's lots of good social learning that's going on. They want to see adults modeling good behavior, right? So there's education that's all bound up with the way foods are used and therefore inform the way foods are selected and ultimately purchased. Food choice, food selection is also bound up with a host of other values, cultural, political, economic. This may not be much here, but this is one of the child care centers we visited, and this particular flag here, the Don't Tread on Me flag, in the US is generally associated with a range of libertarian, fairly right-wing sensibilities. Right? So this is a right-wing child care center. You laugh, right? But it's true. And so what does that mean? I mean, they're not trying to indoctrinate the kids. But it certainly has real implication, right? So the person who runs this child care center is deeply skeptical of the organic label, right? Not because she isn't concerned about pesticides, she does not trust the government or any agency, right? And she will make choices based on that belief. I can show you pictures from left-wing child care as well, we've got those too, and you get the same kinds of things, right? We will not purchase. What's that?
What flag did I use?
It's not so much flags, I can show you manifestos, but, right, we will not purchase our food at Walmart because Walmart is evil, meaning they support Republican causes, okay? So when you're talking about food choice, it's bound up with a bunch of cultural concerns, and this is in some ways not surprising, because that's true of how we consume food everywhere else, why wouldn't it be true of childcare? We also find a huge disparity, or a huge range, just in terms of kind of the physicality of food preparation and food handling, right? Everything from, so this is, you can probably tell, right? This is a facility that was initially a home that then became a child care center. So that kitchen is a home kitchen that is now being asked to do the work of a child care server that has like 7 or 8 kids in it. How's that gonna go, right? That's at one end. On the other hand, you get places like this, right? Which this is it's research data I have on mine, so I like this better than the black part. So this is custom built, new architecture. This is sort of space intended to be used as childcare. Professional grade kitchen, right? Professionally trained kitchen staff, as it turns out. That's unusual, but it does happen. Okay, this is just about the kind of range. Here's an interesting one. This is about storage. So that's, in one facility, that's a storage site. Here's a different one. What's the difference between this and this? It's not obvious. What's that? Junk food. There is some junk food there, but actually I would argue the most important difference between this and this, you see all those empty shelves?
Yeah.
The reason that those shelves are empty is because the chef in this particular facility worked in restaurants for years. She has professional culinary experience. She knows how to plan meals. She knows how to order exactly what she needs so that by the end of the week, the food is gone and she's going to get new food on Monday. Right? She's not dealing with storage because she has this kind of training. She knows how to negotiate with vendors. She is amazing. Right? If she gets food, produce that she's not happy with, it goes back. The vendor pays for it and then gets her deal on the next case. Because she's tough and she knows what she's doing. Right? This is not typically part of childcare training. It happens to be that this is somebody who did professional work and then moved into childcare, and she brings that experience with her. They're dealing with a range of dietary concerns. Food allergies are just a piece of it. You get food preferences coming from different families. You get vegetarian kids coming through. When you've got childcare centers that are dealing with populations that are changing, for example, with migration, you're getting cultural sensibilities, which means new expectations in terms of what actually constitutes food and what food should be served. Okay, so it's constantly in flux. This is not very much like buying food for your kids at home. It's a very different kind of work. Interesting stuff around like preparing food, finding recipes. Every kitchen has got a weird collection of like 70s era recipe books in them, right? These guys are online, they're searching the web, they're finding recipes that way too, but they're all facing the problem of like taking recipes and cookbooks that are designed for single families, serving size 4 to 6, and using that to tweaking the recipes so that they will be kid friendly, right? Unfortunately, that means the chilies go away and other good stuff. And then scaling them up to serve 50 kids, right? That's not easy to do, and most of the people working childcare don't have that kind of training. They're learning it on the job. Okay, we'll talk about how to do that and what that means in a bit. Let me skip that one. So we talked about families, right? Parents are an important stakeholder. Parents are increasingly interested in and involved in the food that is served in childcare, for good and for ill. There are some parents that are very concerned that their kids are eating healthful, organic food. Every single childcare center we visited serves organic milk, even the ones that don't believe in organic, because the parents are demanding organic milk, right? On the other hand, you get other parents who believe kids should eat kid food, which is food that we would probably cringe at, and so there is exerting pressure on the childcare centers as well. So that's one set of stakeholders. Then, of course, you've got regulatory issues as well. So this is part of the USDA food program, requires them that they post their menus. Here's a list of approved foods on the USDA list. The USDA is a federal program that reimburses childcare centers for providing food to low-income kids. This program is hugely influential. What we found were even childcare centers that are not participating in this program are subscribing to the regulations, either because they used to be in the program and they developed all their menus and they're just going with it, or they have a notion that someday in the future they might want to get federal assistance, and so got it. So they're just trying to keep in score. So policy, right, in the same way you were mentioning policy plays a huge role in shaping this experience and ultimately the decisions that people are making. So let's get to actually nutrition. That's what I said I cared about, right? Huge range, okay? So on the left, man, that's like some kind of, I think it's a tuna salad. If I recall, this one was actually like fish caught by the neighbor fisherman, brought over like as fresh as you like, albacore. Fresh produce grown in the garden, handmade, beautiful, so good. And then we've got frozen corn dogs on the other side. So there's a range. What I would say is that the quality of the food that is served does not seem to correlate with any demographic information that you would expect. It doesn't seem, and again, we're doing more rigorous analysis, so this is just my impression, but it doesn't seem to correlate with, for example, the socioeconomic status of the kids. It doesn't seem to correlate with the physical location of the child care center. It doesn't seem to correlate with the size. It doesn't seem to correlate with whether it's an in-home center or a big corporate center or something like that. My impression is if you show me 2 child care centers on paper, I can't really tell you much just by looking at descriptions of the centers. But if I spend 2 minutes in that child care center, I will tell you everything you need to know about the food they're serving without ever looking at it. So what makes the difference between the image on the left and the image on the right? Ultimately, I think it has to do with the staff, the people who are working there, and 3 particular things about them. First, values. Simply put, if you have a foodie in charge, you're going to get better food on the plate. That's it. Child care centers are absolutely an expression of the values of the people who run them. So if you have someone who puts a lot of emphasis on food, they will make sure that they are serving good food in the classroom. They will devote time and resources to the preparation of that food. Second, the expertise, I mentioned already. If you've got someone who's got professional culinary experience involved in procuring and preparing food, you tend to see better food. They simply know how to do it. They know what it means to prepare meals for 50, 60, 100 kids in ways that, someone who is a mom and decided to start doing childcare because she wanted to have more time with her kids just doesn't have that kind of expertise. And finally, the support that staff receives. And I want to be careful here. I'm not using a word like resources here because this is not about money. We have seen centers that are spending pennies per child on meals, providing absolutely brilliant food. We have seen childcare centers with beautiful state-of-the-art kitchens serving crap. It's not the material resources. What it does seem to be is about the kinds of support and particularly the kinds of information they have access to, things like recipes, inspiration for project ideas, curriculum ideas, techniques for dealing with kids who are fussy eaters, their ability to get that information. And that information, because childcare is in such a state of flux, I kind of didn't talk about this, but it's in such a state of flux, there is not a single website you go to. Every childcare center is essentially running a set of experiments. And so the way that the folks working in these facilities are finding out stuff is by talking to each other. The main advantage that a large corporate childcare facility has over a small home daycare center is that the staff at that corporate center are in touch with other people working in childcare, and they're exchanging ideas all the time. People who are just doing home daycare by themselves typically are much more isolated. They don't have access to those networks, and so they're not able to kind of reap the benefit of all of that experimentation that's going on. So this, I would suggest, I'm wrapping up, right? Okay, is actually really good news for design. Right? I said the whole point of doing this research is we're actually going to try to do something. Right? We're going to try to make this better for designers. And the reason I say this is good news for design is I know what to do with these things as a designer, right? The fact that values matter is fantastic because first it means I do not need to compete on price, which is good because my local food network is not going to compete with a Costco and the global food industry on price. We can't, it's not going to happen, right? We can't compete on values. And to the extent that ideas that local matter to people, which it seems to do, the extent that quality matters to people, which it seems to do, is good for us. It also means there's a role that policy can play because policies can enact values. So if you simply change the USDA food program to not just say you have to have this amount of vitamin A, but to start saying, and it has to be sourced locally, like you solved the problem. So that's good stuff, right? That's about policy design and organizational design. Expertise, again, as a designer, we do this stuff all day long. That's training, modules, that's information resources, that's web stuff, that's mobile stuff. We know how to do that, so there's definitely opportunity for us here. And again, if what I mean by support is these kind of robust information sharing networks by practitioners, again, that's social networking stuff. We know how to do that, right? So for me, it's exciting because it's a huge problem, but I feel like we can actually have a lot of impact with design to start making inroads here. And so that's what we're going to be working on for the next couple of years, and we'll get back to it. There's a question for you as we're thinking about lunch. I just love that poster. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much. Something inside. Questions? Anyone?
Probably not a question.
Oh, good.
but what you're doing there, we're doing something similar, but we're teaching the childcare center up there just about bush foods.
Yeah.
And the good thing about teaching kids is that, and you probably find that through your research, is that kids teach the parents.
Exactly. Yeah, oh, it's a huge point. It's a huge point. And, for some of the populations that we're working with here, particularly when you're starting to look at, some of the working class families here, the parents don't have good eating habits. They just, you made the comment too, right? Western food is killing us, right? They don't. And so, what the childcare providers talk about is like, by training the kids, they're training the whole family. And so there's like a much broader kind of public health effect, which we think is huge. Absolutely, yeah.
So we're finding that out too, because we're teaching about agricultural practices, about how the environment and all the food and every plant's a friend.
Yeah.
And then the kids take that home, and I suppose it teaches them healthy, like you're saying, eating habits, but it's also teaching and making them more aware, kids more aware of the environment that they're doing.
Yeah.
So it's great, but we don't have anybody doing any research on it at the moment, but
Yeah.
it's happening. So
That's something we should
come across.
let's talk about that at lunch. I'd love to work with that. Yeah.
Have you had a positive reaction from any of the 16 preschools in regards to kind of connecting with local food networks?
So again, this is very kind of early day stuff for us. Okay, so what I can say is this: high level of interest, not from everyone, but significant, right? The idea of local food it's interesting because we see it, the way it is expressed seems to change whether the person would identify as kind of a left-wing progressive or someone who's right-wing. But the underlying interest is there. High level of interest, this idea of local is very important, and particularly where we are. We're still a very agricultural region. Many people you meet still have family working on farms. So huge level of interest. There have been some difficulties so far, which have to do with things like, how the food hub, for example, offers its food for sale. Just simply doesn't map to the ways that childcare providers buy stuff. But we're working with them on that. We think there's some easy fixes we can do that will start making those inroads happen. So we think there's a lot of interest, but we'll know more as we go and actually start implementing something.
Yeah, just to comment really, we've started to see some action here in relation to the quality of food that's provided in aged care situations. I'm not actually sure, it's a long time since I've used childcare, whether provision of meals in Australian childcare centres is actually that common as opposed to kids bringing their lunches, so a bit different. But the aged care here, obviously, the institutional aspect of that is getting some attention here to those parents in that category. So is that sort of, the same, would you think the same sort of issues?
I think similar issues. So we're also interested in aged care. We've got a list of, we're starting childcare with a bunch of other institutions. So two things. We also have lots of childcare centers where you bring lunch, the kids bring lunch, but even they typically will offer snacks, and there is food that's being offered, and we ultimately want all of that to be included. Aged care I think is fascinating. I suspect you will find some similarities. I think there's still the notion of life values is still going to play a big role. I think some of the kind of curricular concerns are probably not there so much. You're not necessarily trying to teach old people in the same ways you're trying to teach old kids. But I suspect there are other kinds of things you are trying to do that have to do with like keeping them engaged and health, but also emotional and mental health. So I think similar, but there'll probably be some different nuances to it. Yeah. Okay.